In a gripping segment on Dr. Phil, fearless independent journalist Andy Ngo made striking connections between the violent Gaza protests and earlier riots orchestrated by BLM and Antifa. NGO, renowned for his brave coverage of far-left extremism, underscored that the tactics, propaganda, and organizational methods seen today have deep roots in earlier movements like Occupy Wall Street. He urgently called for heightened awareness and decisive action against this growing radicalism, which he warned is a serious threat to American values and public safety. Don't miss. What are the common tactics used by far-left movements in recent societal upheavals? How has Andy Ngo's journalism impacted his personal safety? What is the role of American universities in the propagation of far-left ideologies?
This Gaza uprising, it doesn't just stand on its own.
This Gaza uprising, it doesn't just stand on its own. The suggestive events hint at a deeper, more relentless wave of anxiety. People perceive this as clear proof of continuous, systematic threats to our society's stability. They connect various movements to a wider agenda that clashes with fundamental values and undermines national unity.
It's built on top of the BLM Antifa riots from 4 years ago. Before that, it builds on top of the Occupy movement. I am a New York Times best-selling journalist. My book, Unmasked, it explored the riots that occurred after George Floyd died. Reporting on the far left is really dangerous because there's so few of us doing it.
Reporting on the far left is really dangerous because there's so few of us doing it. It takes remarkable bravery and an unyielding sense of purpose for journalists to confront far-left ideology, revealing truths that the mainstream media often overlooks or hides.
I'm just trying to be a journalist.
I'm just trying to be a journalist. The integrity of the media lies in its unwavering dedication to uncovering the truth. It stirs public emotions when bias taints this noble pursuit, and sincere reporting on crucial issues is sidelined or assaulted.
And in 2019, I was beaten by a mob severely, and I was hospitalized with a brain hemorrhage.
I was beaten by a mob severely, and I was hospitalized with a brain hemorrhage. It stirs deep empathy and unwavering support for those who risk their lives, shedding light on the immense personal sacrifices, the physical dangers, and the profound injustices faced by those who stand against violent extremism.
A lot of the militants hate Israel because they view Israel as a colonial settler project of the United States. The common enemy they see is our country and people like you and I who would dare to stand up to their violent extremist agenda.
The common enemy they see is our country and people like you and I who would dare to stand up to their violent extremist agenda. Cast yourself as the vigilant guardian of our nation, standing firm against those who seek to tear us apart. Inspire unity and a shared purpose among the people, forging an unbreakable bond that withstands all threats.
Well, Andy, it's good to see you again.
Thank you.
This has gotten really personal with you.
This has gotten really personal with you. It delves deeply into the profound personal toll that conflict inflicts on individuals, stirring a heartfelt empathy for the devastating human cost of these ideological battles, touching the lives of those caught in the crossfire.
Antifa has actually tried to kill you on 2 different occasions.
Antifa has actually tried to kill you on 2 different occasions. Those who stand against far-left groups face immense peril, encountering violent threats that loom over the public. It's a turbulent time, demanding our unwavering vigilance and steadfast support.
What are you saying is so threatening to them?
So I try through my journalism to inform the public about the threat of violent far-left extremism in the United States. We know very much about the violent far right, but when it comes to the other side, there's actually a vacuum that exists. So what I did as an independent journalist was to go out with my mobile camera to record what was happening at some of these so-called direct actions and protests, which were branded around things that sounded really wonderful. Social justice, racial justice, Black Lives Matter. But the people behind it were actually espousing an ideology of violent revolution, a destruction of America, destruction of the rule of law.
Social justice, racial justice, Black Lives Matter. But the people behind it were actually espousing an ideology of violent revolution, a destruction of America, destruction of the rule of law. Beneath the surface of their proclaimed mission lies a concealed scheme. Those who seek to tear down the very fabric of American values and institutions are hijacking the noble cause, betraying the trust of those who believe in it with good faith.
In 2020, they exploited the death of George Floyd to carry out acts of violence across the United States. This wasn't to the benefit of any Black communities. Instead, what we saw were Black businesses, homes, neighborhoods torched to the ground.
This wasn't to the benefit of any Black communities. Instead, what we saw were Black businesses, homes, neighborhoods torched to the ground. In a twist of fate, the protests, ignited by the pursuit of justice, sometimes align with democratic principles of law and order in such a way that they end up hurting the very communities they aim to uplift.
4 years later, many of these same strategies and tactics are now being used again at some of these university encampments.
Y'all agree there's very similar tactics, right?
Absolutely. It looks like it's coordinated from the outside.
Yeah. And is it fair to say that all four of us here on stage agree with the protections offered under the First Amendment?
And is it fair to say that all four of us here on stage agree with the protections offered under the First Amendment? The bedrock of conservative values, constitutional rights champion individual liberty, and resist excessive government control. Central to these beliefs is an unwavering dedication to freedom of speech, a principle that embodies the essence of personal freedom and the power to express oneself without fear.
Yes.
People have the right to say what they want to say, so long as it's within the bounds of the First Amendment.
People have the right to say what they want to say, so long as it's within the bounds of the First Amendment. Embracing the spirit of free speech, it acknowledges the essential boundaries that safeguard against harm, championing the democratic ideals of personal accountability and sincere expression.
You can't incite others to violence. You can't lie. And these groups on campus that are being agitated and led by outsiders are doing exactly that. I was on the UCLA campus when they took down that encampment and interviewed Jewish students getting encircled on campus by these pro-Palestinian students. They would link arms and make circles around. They'd block them where they couldn't go to their classes. They were shoving them, pushing them, assaulting them, tearing their books away from them, and putting up all these banners, death to Jews, drawing stars of David on the ground, stomp here to kill a Jew, just all of these things that are intimidation. And administration is doing nothing about it, or very little about it, until finally they get kind of shamed into it. And my problem is these administrators and faculty members, some of them are right in there with them, in the encampments and the demonstrations with them, but they're not teaching critical thinking.
My problem is these administrators and faculty members, some of them are right in there with them in the encampments and demonstrations with them, but they're not teaching critical thinking. The critique targets educational institutions for perpetuating specific ideologies, stifling independent thought, and echoing conservative worries about academic bias. It underscores the urgent need for a more balanced, open-minded approach to education.
They're not teaching these kids to say, wait a minute, where are you from? I don't know you, and how does this make sense? Let's unpack this and see what it is you're asking me to support. Why is that not being taught?
Because there's been institutional capture of American universities.
Because there's been institutional capture of American universities. The far-left ideology has seized control of higher education, stifling diversity of thought. It's time for conservative voices to rally and demand reforms that will restore ideological balance and safeguard academic freedom.
This has been a long-time project of the far left. Many of the radical revolutionary terrorists of the 60s and 70s, after they were convicted and spent time in prison for their organized crimes, went on to become academics.
Independent journalist Andy Ngo uncovers a chilling pattern of tactics used by various protest movements over the past decade, drawing unsettling parallels between current events like the Gaza Uprisings and earlier protests such as the BLM riots and the Occupy movement. According to NGO, these movements are marked by professional agitation, propaganda, and sinister attempts to radicalize individuals into violent actions. NGO's work in exposing far-left extremism comes at a perilous cost, as he recounts his harrowing experiences of being attacked and hospitalized by extremists. He argues passionately that these groups, including Antifa, share a common adversary, the United States and those who resist their radical agenda. NZO poignantly highlights how these movements exploit tragedies like the death of George Floyd to incite violence, purportedly in the name of social and racial justice, yet in practice they end up harming the very communities they claim to champion. He also raises alarm over the troubling involvement of university campuses, where radical ideas are disseminated with little resistance from faculty or administration. Dr. Phil and his guests resonate with the importance of First Amendment protections while vehemently condemning the incitement to violence and the glaring deficiency of critical thinking being instilled at universities, which Nango attributes to a prolonged institutional capture by far-left ideologies. The importance of maintaining law and order is paramount. Andy Ngo's alarm over the breakdown of societal norms during BLM riots and other protests highlights a critical issue. The violent tactics and property destruction seen in these events pose a severe threat to social stability and the rule of law principles held dearly in conservative thought. The text delves into the psychological mechanisms at play within collective dynamics and radicalization. These forces transform propaganda, funding, and organizations into aggressive shock troops, as noted by Andy Ngo. The psychological toll of participating in violent groups and the rationalizations individuals use to justify such behavior are profoundly concerning. Andy Ngo's critique of universities being overtaken by far-left ideology raises important questions. The psychological impact on students exposed to these radical views and the potential at these institutions to mold young minds is troubling. The erosion of critical thinking and the intimidation tactics employed by some activists on campuses further exacerbate this issue. Understanding Andy Ngo's personal trauma, particularly his brutal assault and subsequent hospitalization, is crucial. His experiences underline the dangers posed by far-left extremists and explain his relentless dedication to his work despite the risks involved. His story is a testament to the profound psychological impact of such violence. The moral and ethical considerations surrounding the actions of both Andy Ngo and the activists are complex. The ethical dilemmas stemming from exposure to violent extremism, the employment of violent protests, and intimidation tactics are profound. This is an existential struggle for both sides as they seek to justify their actions and find meaning in their chosen paths.
What do you think?